because I was able to get my education alongside still trying to become a professional athlete. And the coach reached out to me and said that he would like for me to sign with them to play with the USL team. My ambition is for us to qualify for the World Cup. I think if we do, we'd probably be the smallest country to ever qualify.
So this week on a Daily Coaching Football Show, I am pleased to be joined by a very special guest, somebody who has played in the MLS, the USL, and is also a Belize national team player as well. I'm delighted to announce that with us today, we have New York City FC player, Tony Rocha. So Tony, thank you for joining me. It's a pleasure to have you on here. First of all, taking things all the way back, I always like to, when I start off with guests, ask them kind of about their first pair of football boots or their first shirt that they received as a player. But obviously in America, you know, soccer isn't the in thing really, you know, there's obviously bigger sports. So taking it back, can you remember what the first soccer jersey or pair of boots you got, or was it even in a totally different sport altogether?
No, it was the first sport, and funny enough, the only sport that I've ever played in a team setting is soccer or football. Okay. So the first jersey I ever had was, I can't remember, I think it was red and white stripes, and it was just one of those, like in America especially, you're playing soccer just for the fun of it, like you're not really playing it because you grew up watching it or your parents grew up watching it and stuff. So that was my first jersey that I had.
Nice. It's interesting. The reason why I always ask this is because people have the most random stories when I ask them about shirts. Like I was talking to another player the other day, and I said to them that one of my first shirts, so I'm from London in England, and like, you know, there's big clubs in London, you know, your Chelseas, your Arsenals. But one of the first clubs teams that I ever got was a Blackburn Rovers top. And it was because it was in like the reduced section of a sports shop over here. And I just wore it just because at the time I thought, I needed to play football. And this was the sort of one I needed to have. So it's interesting. Yeah. Some people obviously get the ones they support, and some people just get, like you said, you know, might be a certain color or a certain type of design on it. But what about in terms of boots? Because obviously for an outfield player, you know, sometimes players like the boots which are, you know, bright and are going to really show them off as a player, or sometimes people have those real sort of classic boots. Like I think when I grew up, I used to have the Adidas, you know, World Cup boots, real comfortable, basic design, but it got the job done. Can you remember what the first pair that you had were?
Man, this is thinking way back. I don't remember the first pair of boots I had, but I remember they were, like you said, classic, like especially growing up as well. Like I never had any flashy boots or any shiny boots. They were all kind of like black and white or kind of those colors.
Decent. I think sometimes it's better to have those, because if you get the flashy boots and
you don't perform,
yeah, exactly that. So it's a lot easier to identify you. I'd probably advise a lot of players not to wear flashy boots in trials, because it'll go one of two ways, I suppose. But yeah, so talk to me about your sort of journey into the game. How did that all start, and what were the sort of opportunities like? Because obviously I know that you ended up going into college soccer, but something that I'm so intrigued with in America is the pay-to-play system. Obviously over here in England, we don't have it. But when I spoke to another guest, Eddie Johnson, he was so sort of, you know, like adamant that pay-to-play system sometimes hinders players' opportunities to grow. What was your experiences of it like growing up?
Yeah, and I was a part of that pay-to-play system growing up. And I definitely saw the, I guess, negative effects of that with some of the players that I grew up with in high school, and they wanted to play at a higher level, and they could play at a higher level, but they couldn't afford to play. And I think those are the players that kind of fall through the cracks and kind of hinder their ability to play at the next level or even play at university.
Yeah, of course. And I think, like you said, sometimes those players do slip through the cracks. I suppose one of the benefits, though, of playing football or soccer in America is the whole college system. And I think that obviously, especially in England and even to this day, you know, there's a lot of people that try and get opportunities to go over, because obviously you get your football / soccer opportunities, but then you also get education at the same time, which, you know, is so important. But how did you find that college soccer experience? Because, you know, looking at it on TV and looking at it through YouTube clips, it's amazing. Like, you know, you're playing in bigger stadiums and bigger capacities than some of the professionals over here. What was it like for you?
Yeah, no, like you said, it was definitely an opportunity that I'm thankful for, because I was able to get my education alongside still trying to become a professional athlete. But yeah, it was a lot of fun. I think a lot of students there just have pride going to the school, so they go out to any sport that they could and just support the players on the team, and so that was pretty cool to kind of have that support behind you, and yeah, it was definitely a fun experience.
Nice, nice. And taking it back, like I said again, so obviously, in America, soccer isn't always the prominent sport, but like you said, it was the only one kind of for you when you was growing up. Who did you kind of take inspiration from growing up? Was there, say, for example, a family member? Was there in the game, potentially in America? Or was there somebody like globally who you kind of looked at and thought, you know what, I would love to be like them one day?
Yeah, I guess the player that I looked up to the most was Andres Iniesta from Barcelona. A lot of the games were televised here in the US, so just watching him every weekend and just going on YouTube and just watching a bunch of his highlights. I aspired to play like him and to be like him.
Nice. It's not too bad of a player to want to be like as well.
Yeah, but trying to be like him is way harder than looking up YouTube videos. And, yeah.
But it's interesting though. Again, you mentioned about YouTube videos. I think such a good tool. Like sometimes when I'm coaching players, I played football, but not necessarily at the highest levels. And sometimes when we try to do those demonstrations, it's a bit more tricky than it looks. Like you said, kind of trying to do those Iniesta type things. So I think sometimes YouTube can be such a great tool because, especially like now, say for example, where there's obviously a lot of people learning virtually. You ask them to look at a video and potentially try and replicate that in their own time and over their own course of time as well. I think it's such a useful tool for people to be able to use.
Yeah, for sure. And because like there's some people out there that are visual learners, and you even see it with some of my teammates. The coach is telling them what to do on the field, this and that, and they have no idea, but they can't really comprehend. And then we go into the video room, and then they show them there, and then they pick it up in like 5 seconds. So it's definitely a different tool to help players because we're all different learners.
Yeah, 100%. Such a key point there as well. Like you said, everyone learns differently. And I think the thing is that, like you said, sometimes when managers, coaches try and get their message across, it's such a big responsibility that they should have on their shoulders in terms of, like you said, being able to cater for everybody because, like you said, there's so many different learners, even in terms of different languages as well. I think like using visual cues are such a good way to try and get that across to players where you may not speak the same language, but you also want to try and get them to do something. So I think, yeah, it's definitely quite a big tool for coaches and players or managers to be able to use. So then kind of looking, like you said, you played obviously college soccer, and like you said, you mentioned that, good opportunity and you was very grateful for it. And I think one of the good things with that as well is it seems ultra competitive. And what I mean by that is not in a negative way, but, just the competition level is so high and, everyone's kind of really striving to want to go further within their career. How did the break come from you? So you went into college soccer, and then how did that sort of transfer into moving into the game, into the pro side of things?
Yeah, so when I was in college, during the summer, we don't really have any games, whether for club or for anything. So there's a league here called the Premier Development League, and that's during the summer, and that's for college players that kind of want to continue to play and kind of stay sharp. And so I played with the team in Austin. They were PDL for I think 3 or 4 of my years summer that I was in college, and they were actually going to USL the year that I was graduating. So they stepped into that Division 2 here in the US, and the coach reached out to me and said that he would like for me to sign with them to play with the USL team. So that was kind of my connection from being in college to signing my first professional contract with the USL team.
Nice. And obviously both of the American leagues, the USL and also the MLS, it's grown so much over probably like the last 10 years, I'd say. What was that kind of experience like for you? Because I'm taking it, obviously, when you first came into the game, it would have been around that kind of time where, quite rightly so, the light was starting to be shined on American football, American soccer, and the growth of the game. How did you feel that kind of was from the outside of things? You'll see from your point of view, and quite rightly so, when people are first starting out within the game, you're just playing the game. That's your main thing. You're playing the game, wanting to see obviously how far you can go. But how did you see that kind of environment change in terms of sort of the coaching that was involved, in terms of the sort of ability of players that were sort of coming over / abilities being raised? Was it noticeable within your environment?
Oh yeah. So when I first went from college to USL, the USL was still a new league. I think the MLS was barely maybe 10, 15 years into their existence. And so I guess there was hope that the league was going to grow here in the US. But even coming out of college, like my coach had mentioned like, okay, maybe you shouldn't go USL, like stay and go to grad school or something, get I guess educated more and go that route. Like don't take a chance. And because it was Division 2, like you weren't making that much money, like the competition really wasn't that high back then. But I think with the influx of money and the players that have been scouted and everything, and that has helped the league grow, both the USL and the MLS, it's definitely skyrocketed. And now I think a lot of players, as you've seen, have been scouted to come play in the MLS with their youth in like Brazil, Argentina, all these South American, Central American players want to come play in the MLS because it's growing.
Yeah, 100%. And also as well, I think, like you said, not that necessarily the ability wasn't higher before, but I think, because it's so much more globally accessible now in terms of being able to watch games from America, I think we're really starting to see, like, including yourself, like I said, I've seen you playing games. You think of some of the stories of players who have gone across from the American leagues into Europe. And I think that, like I said, I don't know whether or not the ability is raised. I mean, potentially the coaching's got better because maybe more people have been educated and there's been more of a focus on soccer. But I just think as an overall, yeah, like you said, there's been a lot more sort of like light shone on top of it and players have been able to exceed. And obviously, in terms of clubs and these franchises, they've become a lot bigger as well. Now, in your time alone, like I said, I think it's good that you went through kind of the whole journey in a sense. So, you played in college soccer, you went to the USL, and then obviously now in the MLS as well. And in terms of the MLS, obviously you played for some really big teams in terms of Orlando and obviously now at New York. And especially in terms of how New York is franchised as well, in terms of the link with Manchester City. How does it feel to represent some of those biggest clubs within that division? And not pressure, but does it sort of add some extra sort of responsibility in terms of you and how you perform week in, week out?
Yeah, not really the pressure like you said, but it's more of kind of representing New York City FC, and I kind of that chip on your shoulder, like, oh, we're affiliated with the City Football Group, and like just having that kind of in the back of our minds, like they chose us to be a part of the team, like we should go out there and fight for the badge, like on the front of the jersey. So that's kind of the mentality that we have going into training every day and into games.
Yeah, nice. It's a fantastic one to have as well, because I think depending on whichever club you play for, you carry that throughout. And I always think to myself, especially like what you said there, just listening to that almost isn't sort of, something which you would achieve in becoming a New York City player, but that's you and your personal characteristics and traits. So I think, yeah, kind of almost as whatever club you go across to, you'd probably have those same type of attitudes towards things as well. But yeah, like you said, obviously in terms of, like you said, being able to be represented by, like you said, the four city group, but then also as well, something that really intrigues me about the American leagues as well is, I mean, don't get me wrong, like I said over here, London, obviously it's a big place, nowhere near as some of the states in America, but just how behind the fans get. I remember I went to a game, I think it was in 2011, and I was living over in Boston for a little while, and I went to go and watch at the Gillette Stadium. I went to go and watch New England Revolution v New York Red Bulls. And it was a time, obviously, I think when Thierry Henry was playing there, and I think Tim Cahill. But just how many fans there were. I mean, like the next day I saw it again, and I think it's the New England Patriots who played, obviously, in American football. But it was almost such a similarity. There was no difference really in terms of the crowd size and the atmosphere before the games. There's such a big sort of backing behind every game that you go into. And I think that kind of filters through from the college system, doesn't it, really?
Yeah, no, I agree. Kind of just having that support, like you said, in college, and then it kind of filters into the MLS, and they're just playing. I mean, you see with Atlanta United when they came into the league and they're filling out their stadium. I think they averaged like 60,000 or 65,000 fans for the season. So yeah, it's definitely a just like an awesome atmosphere to play in when there's that many fans, even if they're rooting against you.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's true. I think, even now as well, again, another player that I interviewed is a guy who plays for Montreal Impact. He's an English young kid. And he said one of the main reasons why he went to America was exactly that. He said, he's actually said the exact same thing as you. It doesn't really matter if they're rooting against me. Ideally not. But, just like you said, the atmosphere and the environment of being able to play in that, I think is, next to none. But, like you said, or like I was saying before, you play for some really big clubs, even in terms of, USL teams as well, and obviously now MLS. So far along your journey, has there been any sort of real standout moments for you? Obviously, I know you had the opportunities to play. I think you got an appearance in the CONCACAF competition, and also obviously the playoffs in the MLS. But what would you say so far has been your standout moment as a professional soccer player?
It would probably be last or 2 seasons ago now, but just the season I had with New York. Coming from Orlando, I think we were 10th, 11th in the league. Didn't make playoffs when I was there, and then coming to a team such as New York and being able to start a lot of the games and us winning the Eastern Conference that season, kind of just a change in my career from one year to another was not really a shock, but it wasn't something that I was expecting, and it was I don't know, just a great year that I had, and kind of that, I guess, if I can encompass that one moment for that entire year that I had in that MLS.
Nice. It's interesting as well, because when you speak to different players and you ask them things like that, some of them will say they go straight to sort of the glory days of something they may have won or something like that. But I think it's really humbling to hear, like you said there, playing well. A time when you was playing well, and a time when, like you said, actually you came across and you thought, you know what, like I said, it wasn't a shock to the system, but it was kind of like, this is kind of go time. I have to kind of get straight stuck in here. And I think sometimes obviously it depends on which clubs you move to, but especially as well, like, again, Orlando are a massive club as well. But when you go to a club, like you said, which is involved in the City Group, there's a certain expectations there. And I think that, they're definitely on their way to and have achieved already some great things. But yeah, when you have so much pressure from sort of like a consortium like that, you almost have to go in and deliver straight away. But then again, at the same time, I think that's a reflection on, how well you've been doing with Orlando in terms of getting the move across, and then, becoming more of a regular player in New York as well. So I can imagine that transition for you just must have been not mind blowing, but, just like you said, like, this is what I've kind of really aimed to go towards, and this is kind of what I want to do in my career, sort of thing.
Yeah. And that was kind of, I guess, all the hard work that I put in the past 3 years in Orlando kind of coming to fruition in New York City.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I think, like you said, it's that backstory, isn't it? People often tend to see you at certain moments in your career, but totally not either understand or get how you've actually got there and what that process of that story or that journey has been like. So I think that's really interesting. So in terms of kind of, again, career so far, and like you said, you mentioned your sort of standout moment or your highlight moment there. What would you say is one thing which has kind of been the thing for you where you can go, do you know what? That's the reason why I love soccer or why I love football. Is it something to do with in the game, or is it something to do with, like you said before, kind of like, the atmosphere and the environment and the setting that you're within?
Yeah, I would say two things. Definitely the atmosphere for sure. Just walking out to the field and having the fans, if you're at home, chanting for you, if you're away, chanting against you, like just having those goosebumps on, just on your body whenever you're walking out there. And then another thing is kind of just after the games, whenever you're walking to the tunnel and you hear people screaming your name or wanting your autograph and stuff, like that's why I guess we want to be in the sport, for kind of that fame aspect of it. But that's definitely a good feeling after games.
100%. And I have to ask, what is that like? I mean, no one's ever called my name, and if they have, it probably hasn't been for a great reason, to be honest. But what is that like? I know it sounds silly, but if someone calls your name, do you look behind and think, who was that? Or do you everything, all the noise just kind of block it out a little bit?
It depends. When it's after games and the fans are kind of cleared and I hear my name, then I'll like look up at the fans and give them a wave and stuff.
Nice. That's quality. I think as well, it goes to show again your personality and your character, because sometimes, and don't get me wrong, whereas potentially it could be a little bit different if it was a loss. You just want to get straight down that tunnel. But it must, like you said, it must be such an incredible sort of environment and atmosphere to play within. But then again, looking back kind of on your process and your journey of going up into the game, like I kind of mentioned, one of the key points where I really enjoy and like the whole maybe the play to pay part, but why I kind of really like the American system is obviously, like I said, you have to go through obviously your college soccer, or more often than not, you go through your college soccer, and then obviously, like I said, you're kind of getting an education alongside that. Two things really. Number one, what was that education you got going alongside your opportunities to play? And also, as I always like to ask players this, because obviously, congratulations in terms of getting to the stage you got at. If you thought about maybe, do you know what, I couldn't make it in football and soccer, what profession do you reckon you would have gone down?
So I didn't get my degree at Tulsa, but I got my degree last year,
Okay.
Southern New Hampshire University, general studies. But I originally went to Tulsa for exercise sports science, so I hadn't having to do with sports, going into college. But that was to answer your first question. For the second question, what would I be doing if I didn't make it? I don't know, but I think if I had to guess, it'd probably be somewhere in the medical field. I know going into college like that kind of side, the side of it like I was interested in. So that's what I wanted to do kind of going into college.
Nice. I like that as well because I always tend to, when I talk to younger players, always say to them, and it's not to be unambitious, but it's always say, listen, try and get like another, you know, sort of strength or skill behind you. And I kind of often think as well, and it kind of leads on to this next point, that sometimes, depending on which studies you may take or sort of, you know, which situations and scenarios you've been through in life, it really kind of helps you to develop key learning skills and life skills. Do you feel that any of those sort of like teachings or learnings or understandings from that sports course that you're doing, or the, you know, the education that you're doing, do you feel that any of that's helped you within your game today, or you know, you can reflect on any of that and go, oh, actually, do you know what? I understand this a bit better now because obviously I'm a player.
Yeah, a lot of it was kind of movement based and like science based that can translate to being an athlete. And so kind of learning that side of it. A big one was nutrition, just learning the nutrition aspect of like sports and everything. And I've definitely taken that into being a professional athlete, and also like the lifting aspect of it as well. I learned a little bit in college. So those kind of two things were the biggest takeaways that I took from my college career.
Nice. And like you said, I think there is such a sort of transferable crossover there in terms of, like you said, knowing what to eat, knowing how what you eat may affect you. And like you said, even in terms of the lifting, in terms of your training, I suppose like you said before, obviously now where it's a bit of downtime, you know, it's how do I train and what do I train in and how are these different training methods and mechanisms going to actually help me within my game. And I think that's the often key thing really. I think a lot of people, especially over in England, you know, as soon as people can go to the gym, they go to the gym straight away. But a lot of the times, they don't necessarily understand what they're doing at the gym or why they're doing it or what the outcome of that will be. And I think sometimes, you know, you look in the gym, you might think, oh, do you know what, that person's benching a lot over there, but it actually probably doesn't have much relevance to the game.
Yeah.
So I think, you know, it's interesting, like you said, they're picking up on some of those points about how you can take those learnings, because ultimately, I think a lot of people within the football profession, they have gone through some sort of course or education specifically within sports. And I do think that that definitely helps them sort of, you know, like you said, prepare mentally, prepare physically for, like you said, when you have downtime. Because I suppose in this downtime, what's that training been like for you? Do you get sent much sort of programs or routines that you have to do, or is it all kind of left down to yourself?
Yeah, it's kind of just left down to ourselves. So some guys go home and they're just playing on the Xbox or PlayStation all day, and that was me in my early soccer career. But now I enjoy reading, so sometimes I'd read. Some I have a dog, so I take him out to the park and just hang out and stuff like that. So kind of decrease my screen time because I know that can get addicting. But yeah, I definitely was one of those video game players whenever I was first starting my career.
Nice. So at least it's a nice balance, to be fair, because like you said,
Yeah,
you've had that time when you've done that, and also as well, I think that's important what you mentioned there about just having downtime. Like sometimes, I mean, don't get me wrong, it's not a bad trait to have, but sometimes players are so go 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 all the time, and it's kind of like they never switch off and they never have time just to forget about things and, you know, wait until there's an opportunity to get back into the game where they've had no break, so they don't almost see no difference. So nice, and
yeah,
it's an interesting point. Something which I wanted to pick up on. So over here in England, a big thing before a game is well, two things really. Number one, players often, when you watch them on TV, they go into games and like walking into the stadiums and they have headphones on. And for a while, a lot of people criticised it over here. There's like, you know, why have people got headphones on, and you know, it should be prepared in a different way. But when I think back to like games and when I went into matches or even just stressful situations, I think music is such a key thing to be able to help you calm your nerves. Now, don't get me wrong, I've asked players this question before, and some of them say they listen to heavy metal rock. Some people really slow and mellow music, some people in between. But in America, is there a sort of big thing where perhaps before the game, music will be played and music will be put on to kind of boost that sort of adrenaline or atmosphere almost?
Yeah, no, that's music is always on in the locker room before our games. And like even it's funny because like if someone gets a call or something and it stops the music, like everybody's up in arms. So like, yo, where'd the music go? What happened to music? So like yeah, music's definitely something that gets the locker room going, gets the atmosphere and kind of gets us ready for the game.
No, that's quality. I can imagine it's either, like you said, somebody gets a call midway through or a message, or you'll soon realize who has the subscriptions on, say, for example, Spotify and who doesn't. And all of a sudden you hear the adverts coming on.
Yeah.
So no, it's a quality thing to have. If then, say, for example, you was given the option of controlling the playlist, and I suppose, like you said, especially where it's the same as over here in England as well, a lot of people say it's a real big responsibility because you
I do not want that responsibility.
If you did, what would you choose? What would be a sort of genre or typical artist that you may play?
So I would try to keep the entire locker room happy. So there's obviously different cultures, like you said. So I would definitely play Spanish music for the people, and then just rap music. Those are kind of the two that fluctuates in the locker room. So rap and Spanish music. Yeah,
no, it's decent. I think because, like you said, do you know what? There's that people can love you for it and think, yeah, do you know what? I love this sort of music and gets them pumped up. Or we could probably put some people in a bad mood if, say, for example, you put on a song which they don't particularly like, or a genre they don't particularly like, and all of a sudden head's gone almost. So, but yeah, like you said, I think it is such a big responsibility. It seems like such a minor thing within the whole aspect of, you could be going into a final, say, for example, but the right music and being in the hands of the right individual can definitely, I suppose, get the mood going and the atmosphere going as well, almost.
Yeah, there's actually some guys in the locker room who don't even deal with that, and they just have their own headphones in and listen to their own music. So yeah.
Nice. But again, I suppose it's what ever gets people sort of going in their different ways, almost, as it is. So yeah, nice. I think it's definitely a good way of getting you mentally prepared as well. But then again, kind of said before, you play for some incredible clubs in the USL and MLS as well. And I always like to ask people this, and it's not always necessarily based on ability. It might be based on personality. It might be based on sort of social elements. So you've got on really well with them. But if you had to pick a ultimate five-a-side team of players that you played with within your time, who would you pick in that team and why?
Ooh, ultimate side. Goalkeeper will have to be Sean Johnson, that I'm playing with now. I guess the defense would be Maxime Chanot. He's on team now. Kaka. Up top would probably be Kyle Larin. I played with him in Orlando. So that's three. And then midfielders would be Maxi Morales. And then Yoshi. I played with him in Orlando. He plays at Cruz Azul now in Mexico. So those are probably the five-a-side that I'd pick.
Nice. Not being funny, it's not too bad of a five-a-side team, that.
No, it's decent. I know there's a lot of change in Orlando, so I think the teams or the players that I played with down there.
Nice. And what's some of the reasons behind that? So like I said, sometimes people pick it on ability, and it's interesting. A few players have said to me, like, do you know what? These players were getting my five-a-side team, but if I had an 11-a-side team, probably a bit of a different story, purely based on, the bigger spaces and not as technical based. Yeah, what's your kind of thoughts behind some of those players?
Yeah, so Kaka for sure, because he's technical and could just take over the game. Yoshi as well as technical. Maxime just because he's back there in the defense and just winning tackles and just not letting anything behind. And then Kyle Larin because he just scores goals. Like he could be looking one way and the ball hits off his head and goes in the goal. Like those are the kind of goals that he scored when he was in Orlando.
Nice. And like two things you mentioned there, which are quite key as well, is like you said, number one, just having a goal scorer. Like I think it's so underestimated within the game. And don't get me wrong, I'm not taking away all the important key points of developing players and looking and breaking things down. But sometimes you just want a goal scorer. Like especially if you're in midfield, defense, goal, anywhere but that forward line. You just want a player you can get the ball to and can ultimately score you goals because. Number one, it takes the pressure off yourself a little bit, and also as well, it definitely gives you a bit more confident knowing that actually, do you know what? Whatever position this person gets the ball in, they're going to score probably. And I think that nowadays, you often see a lot of strikers, maybe not necessarily, well, I was going to say not necessarily people like Lukaku, who maybe, before he's pronounced sort of holding up the ball, then maybe turning and shooting and things like that. But even nowadays, he probably sometimes takes players on a little bit. So I think, definitely having that sort of key goal scorer in your team. And I have to ask, obviously, what is it like playing with Kaka? Because obviously, again, yourself, midfield player. When you play with players like that, and there'll be players that look up to you like that as well. What is that like? Do you sort of almost try to replicate their game, or B, do you just try and sort of absorb as much information and take away as much information as you can, and then distribute it as and where you're kind of needing it within your games in certain situations?
Yeah, I just try to absorb as much information from him as possible. I know just during training, if we're on the same small-sided team, just like learning from him, watching his movement, just those little things that kind of separates him from everybody else's things that I try to pick up on and kind of just try to learn from them.
No, fantastic. I think, like you said, that's what you kind of have to do in a way, because, like you said, even in terms of, taking it all the way back to the start of the conversation where you said, you used to watch videos of Iniesta, ultimately we'll see players, and like I said, players who look up to you and will watch you on YouTube and see how you play and go, do you know what, that's how I want to be as a footballer or a soccer player. But I think ultimately you're your own individual. And, Iniesta's his own individual, Kaka's his own individual. And I think, people take bits away from each of these characters, like I said, take bits away from you and how you play, but then they kind of adapt it and mold it into their own game. And I think sometimes as well, I suppose, a question I just wanted to kind of think about and ask around was, in America, what's the sort of change in management's like? Because over in England, you could have a manager here for 6 weeks, or to 4, 5, 6 years. There's quite a different range of stints of managers. But I think one of the key things I always talk to players about is how you have to adapt your game based on a new manager coming in. So you might play in a certain way, and it works really well for the manager that you're with at the moment. And I know, obviously, in terms of the management team that's over at the moment, especially one of them came over from England, and you could then have a different manager come in and they want you to play a different way. How easy is it to adapt as a player in terms of wanting or getting what the managers want out of you?
It's not easy. I think I've played under 4 or 5 different managers in my MLS career. A lot of them in Orlando, and then here in New York is twice. And so, like you said, under the first manager that I had here in New York, like I grew favor with him, and so I was playing, and he enjoyed how I played in this. And now a new manager comes in, and I have to do that all over again. Have to go out there and show that I can play and this and that. And it took me a while, and I think now I'm starting to show him that. So I look forward to this upcoming season, having the same manager under for another season. But yeah, it's definitely harder than I guess people may think it is to kind of have a different manager with different values, with different whatever it may be, rules that he has in the locker room, out of the field, like completely different than the previous manager. So it takes a while for some players. Some players never do it. That's why they get like traded or get don't play and stuff. So yeah, it's definitely a hard thing to do.
It's interesting because taking it all the way back to the start of the conversation, it almost goes back to your early career where you're almost trialing again. As a new manager coming in, it's almost like you're on a trial again and you have to impress.
Yeah.
I'm hoping that you didn't wear those bright boots this time round.
No.
But no, it's quality. But yeah, so again, kind of looking towards the end of it then, and thinking about, like you just said there, leading it on. Obviously, you mentioned, you're going to be going into pre-season soon. What's kind of the team's aspirations for this upcoming season and your own aspirations as well?
Yeah, so the team's aspirations, I think, every year is to not only make playoffs, but to win the MLS Cup. I think we're going into the season making playoffs isn't enough because we do really well regular season, but we just have to, I guess, get over that hump of the playoff games and make the MLS Cup, because I think we know we have good enough quality on the team to take us there. And then also the domestic cup here in the U.S. is the Open Cup, and so to win that as well is definitely on our radar. And then I would say for me personally is kind of just to start as many games as I can, go out there and start and win those games as well. So anytime I'm starting to be able to win those games.
No, that's fantastic. And I think, like you said, in terms of the team that you're within, yes, definitely, including yourself as well. You've got that quality within the team. And I think, like you mentioned again, you mentioned it earlier on in the conversation as well, about sometimes just being in a good reign of form and getting some consistency behind your games, I think is crucial as well. And just to kind of end it off, because I wanted to really mention this point, obviously in terms of internationally, you played for the Belize team quite a few times. What's that experience like in terms of representing them? And again, what's your kind of ambitions kind of leading up to the upcoming year and a season ahead in terms of getting some more games for them as well?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely an honor representing the country. My mom was born there, so I was able to get citizenship for that country. So just being able to represent them down there was an amazing experience. But I just think being able to travel to different countries and play football and just seeing the different countries and the different cultures and everything is something that I was grateful for last season. And I think for this year, we have World Cup qualifiers coming up. So just my ambition is for us to qualify for the World Cup. I think if we do, we'd probably be the smallest country to ever qualify. So that's definitely something to strive for.
No, 100%. And it's exciting as well. I think, like you said, for some players, number one, just to become a professional is one tick. To, represent an international side is another tick. And like you mentioned, the opportunity to be able to go and play at the World Cup, even bar that, just being able to play in sort of, World Cup qualifiers,
Yeah.
It's almost, I can imagine it must be something like, you look back in your career and like I said, you're still going within your career, but even at just this small amount of time, you surely must just think, oh my God, this is incredible what I've achieved and what I'm going on to achieve as well.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, it's first goal whenever I was growing up was to play professional soccer, and then from there it was to make the national team, and then from there it's to play in the World Cup. And so those are just different boxes I wanted to tick, and I'm almost there ticking all of them. So.